sleep that night. Even after the police left, even after every door and window was checked and rechecked, my body refused to relax. Every small sound, the settling of the cabin, the wind brushing the walls, felt like a warning. Morning, the forest looked normal again. That was the part I hated the most. Sunlight poured through the trees. Birds moved freely. The trail behind the cabin looked harmless, almost inviting. If someone had shown me that place without context, I would have never believed what had happened just hours earlier. I packed up and left immediately. The drive home was quiet, my thoughts looping endlessly. I kept replaying moments where I could have made a different choice, turning back earlier, trusting that first bad feeling, not trying to prove something to myself. The police never followed up. There was no suspect, no description detailed enough to track. A man in his mid-20s, average build, strange smile, that could have been anyone. Without a name or evidence, the story ended where it began, with nothing. But for me, it didn't end there, because once you felt it, that unmistakable sense of being targeted, you never forget it. It's different from fear. It's deeper. Like your instincts screaming a truth your brain hasn't caught up to yet. I stopped camping after that. Friends asked why. I gave vague answers, said it wasn't really my thing anymore, that life got busy, that I'd grown out of it. The real reason was harder to explain. Sometimes, late at night, I still think about the man who brought nothing to the campsite. No food, no gear, no reason to be there except me. And sometimes, I think about the other times the woods have felt wrong. The voice calling my name years earlier, Cameron disappearing into the trees, way different experiences, years apart, all shared the same quiet warning. Don't follow, don't stay, don't ignore what you feel, because the forest doesn't always announce danger. Sometimes it whispers, and sometimes the only thing that saves you is listening. The moment I realized he was following me, my body went cold. At first, I told myself not to panic. The trail curved and twisted, and there was a chance, a small one, that he was just heading in the same direction. But every time I slowed, he kept the same distance. Every time I picked up the pace, he did too. Always there, always silent. I didn't look back again for a while. I was afraid that if I did, I'd see him closer than before. The sun was dropping fast now, sinking behind the trees and pulling the light out of the forest. Strangely, the growing darkness worked in my favor. Shadows swallowed the trail, making it harder for him to see exactly where I was. I moved faster, boots crunching against dirt and leaves, my breath coming out in short, sharp bursts. Finally, through the trees, I saw it. The cabin. Relief hit me so hard my knees nearly gave out. Broke into a run, burst through the front door, and slammed it shut behind me. I dropped my backpack on the floor and locked the door, then locked it again, just to be sure. My hands shook so badly, I had to force them to cooperate. I didn't turn on the lights. Instead, I moved slowly to the back window and watched the forest. Minutes passed. Nothing moved. The last traces of sunlight faded, and the woods became a solid wall of black. Just as I started to think I might be safe, a loud knock exploded against the front door. Not a polite knock, not a hesitant one. It was violent, repeated, like someone slamming their fist as hard as they could. My heart jumped into my throat. The knocking didn't stop. It turned into pounding over and over again, rattling the doorframe. I couldn't tell if he was trying to scare me or break his way inside. Backed away and grabbed my phone, dialing the police with shaking fingers. The second I started talking, the pounding stopped. I froze. He was listening. Heavy footsteps circled the cabin, fast and deliberate. I heard thuds against the walls, then a sharp noise near one of the windows, like someone testing it. I crouched behind the couch, whispering into the phone, afraid to breathe too loudly, and just as suddenly as it started, the sound stopped. Footsteps retreated into the woods. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. 20 minutes later, 2 officers arrived. With flashlights in hand, they searched the area around the cabin and followed the trail back toward the campsite. They didn't find him. His tent was gone. No gear, no tracks, no sign that he'd ever been there at all. As the officers left, One of them told me something I'll never forget. "Next time," he said quietly, "listen to your gut." Because if I had ignored it any longer, I don't think I'd be telling this story. At first glance, he didn't look threatening. He waved casually, like running into someone at a grocery store instead of deep in the woods. But something about his smile stuck with me. It was technically normal teeth showing, corners of his mouth turned up, but the rest of his face stayed completely still. His eyes didn't soften. His expression didn't change. It felt practiced. I nodded back, uneasy, and went back to my tent, pretending to focus on adjusting the rain cover. I told myself he was just another camper who happened to arrive at the same time. Still, the timing felt off. This campsite didn't look like it was used often. No firewood stacked, no clear paths, no fresh tracks. And yet, minutes after I arrived, he appeared. I tried to ignore him. I gathered sticks for a fire, organizing them near an old fire ring. As I worked, I kept catching movement in my peripheral vision. Every time I glanced over, he was looking directly at me, like he'd been watching the entire time. Each time I quickly looked away. That's when I noticed something strange. He didn't unpack anything. No cooler, no sleeping bag, no cooking gear. All he brought was a small sling bag with a tent stuffed inside. When he set it up, I realized it was mostly mesh see-through. No rain cover, no insulation, and he just sat there, doing nothing. No phone, no food, no fire, just watching. A cold knot formed in my stomach. As the afternoon wore on, the sun slowly dipped toward the trees. Shadows stretched across the clearing, and the thought of being there alone with him after dark made my skin crawl. My gut screamed at me to leave. I hated the idea of quitting my first solo trip, but I hated the idea of staying even more. The cabin wasn't far. I could make it back before sunset if I moved quickly. I started packing. The moment I did, the man stood up. He tried to look casual, but his body betrayed him. His eyes tracked every movement I made. The smile was gone now, replaced by a flat, irritated expression. I didn't bother organizing my bag. I shoved everything in and zipped it as best I could. When I finally shouldered my backpack, the light was fading fast. The man hadn't taken his tent down. That gave me a small sense of relief. Maybe he planned to stay. Maybe I was overreacting. I stepped onto the trail. Every few seconds, I glanced over my shoulder. At first, the trail behind me was empty, but about 10 minutes in, I turned again, and my stomach dropped. Through the trees, far back on the trail, he was walking toward me. Unhurried, silent. My heart slammed in my chest as I picked up the pace. I didn't know it yet, but that walk back to the cabin was about to turn into something much worse. Years passed after that night with Cameron. I stayed away from camping for a long time. Even walking wooded trails made my nerves hum in a way they never had before. Still, something about the outdoors kept pulling me back. Not fear, curiosity. A need to prove to myself that I hadn't lost control over something I once loved. Last year, in early November, I finally gave in. I took a trip back to my hometown, mostly to see old friends, partly to get some distance from the noise of daily life. I rented a small vacation cabin tucked deep into the woods, quiet, isolated, and surrounded by forest in every direction. I told myself it was the perfect setup. Behind the cabin was a trail leading to a small, unofficial campground. Nothing fancy, no reservations, no crowds. If anything went wrong, the cabin was only an hour's walk away. It felt safe, controlled. I had never camped alone before, but I'd spent months researching gear, watching tutorials, and reading advice from experienced campers. I was careful, prepared, or at least I thought I was. The first couple of days passed without incident. Caught up with friends, relaxed at the cabin, and double-checked my equipment again and again. When the day finally came, I packed my bag and stepped onto the trail with a strange mix of excitement and nervous energy. First 10 minutes were fine. I focused on adjusting my pack, checking straps, and making sure nothing was rubbing the wrong way. It kept my mind busy, kept me from thinking too much. Then the feeling started. It was subtle at first, tightness in my chest, a quiet awareness that I wasn't alone, even though I knew logically that I was. Every time I glanced off the trail into the trees, a hollow dread settled in my stomach. Like I was being watched. I tried to laugh it off. It was my first solo trip. Of course I was anxious. Anyone would be. But the feeling didn't fade. It grew heavier with every step, pressing in from all sides. More than once, I considered turning back. The cabin was right there. Warm, safe, rational. But I ignored my instincts. By the time I reached the campsite, the forest opened into a small clearing. If it weren't for a few scraps of trash left behind by previous campers, I wouldn't have even recognized it as a campsite. It was unkempt, overgrown, barely used. Still, being off the narrow trail helped. The open space eased my nerves just enough to convince me to stay. I started setting up my tent, carefully following the instructions. It took longer than I expected, about 15 minutes, but I was proud when it finally stood on its own. That's when I noticed him. A man had just arrived at the edge of the clearing. He was tall, about my age, and when our eyes met, he raised his hand and smiled. The smile didn't reach his eyes, and as he walked toward the campsite, a familiar sense of dread crept back in. Footsteps kept coming. Slow, controlled, too calm for the middle of the night. Each step pressed deeper into my chest, tightening my breath. Cameron stood there, frozen, eyes darting between me and the darkness behind him. I searched his face for fear. I didn't see any. That was the moment everything snapped into focus. Adrenaline surged through me, sharp and blinding. I didn't stop to argue. I didn't demand answers. My body moved before my mind could catch up. I ran, straight down the trail, abandoning my tent, my bag, everything. Branches slapped my arms as I pushed through the darkness, feet barely staying under me as panic took over. Behind me, I heard voices. Not shouting, not chasing, talking. Two people having a calm conversation while I fled for my life. I refused to look back. The trail blurred beneath me. My lungs burned. Every sound behind me felt like someone gaining ground, like hands reaching out from the dark. I didn't stop until headlights came into view. My car. I ripped the door open, threw myself inside, and locked it with shaking hands. Only then did I let myself breathe. My entire body trembled as I sat there, staring into the darkness beyond the windshield. Thank God we drove separately. My phone and keys were still in my pocket. I started the engine and didn't slow down until I was miles away from the forest. When I got home, sleep was impossible. My mind replayed every moment Cameron's behavior, the voices, the footsteps. None of it made sense, but one thing was clear. That trip hadn't been spontaneous for everyone. I texted Cameron the next morning. No response. A few hours later, I tried again. The message didn't deliver. He'd blocked me. That was the last contact I ever had with him. To this day, I don't know who else was in those woods or what Cameron was involved in. I don't know if it was a setup, a coincidence, or something darker. All I know is that if I'd hesitated for even a few more seconds, I might not have made it back to my car. And that wasn't the last time the woods would teach me to trust my instincts, because another trip, years later, would push that lesson even further. First, I tried to convince myself I was overthinking it. People wander off in the woods all the time. Maybe Cameron just needed a moment alone. Maybe he was pacing, clearing his head. None of that was strange on its own. But then he did it again. We were sitting near the fire, talking about nothing important, when Cameron suddenly stopped mid-sentence. His eyes shifted past me, locking onto something deep in the trees. He went quiet for a beat, then stood up. Right back, he said again, and walked away. No explanation, no hesitation. This time I followed his gaze. The trees were still. No movement, no sound. Nothing that should have pulled his attention so completely. That's when a knot formed in my stomach. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. I started replaying the moment in my head. The way he'd stopped talking. The way his expression had changed. It didn't feel casual anymore. When Cameron finally returned, I asked where he'd gone. He paused just long enough to notice. Nowhere, he said. That was it. No follow-up. No clarification, just nowhere. I laughed it off, but my skin prickled. Something about his answer felt rehearsed, like he'd already decided what he was going to say before I asked. Still, I didn't push. We'd worked together for 6 months, talked almost every day. Few strange moments weren't enough to make me think he was dangerous. I told myself that if something was really wrong, I'd know. As night settled in, we sat by the fire and talked until the flames burned low. Eventually, we both crawled into our tents. I fell asleep quickly, exhausted from the hike and the long day. I don't know what woke me. I just remember opening my eyes and noticing how quiet everything was. No wind, no rustling leaves, just the soft, distant sounds of the forest breathing. I unzipped my tent slightly and looked out. Cameron's tent was open, empty. I stepped outside, scanning the campsite. He wasn't by the fire. He wasn't near the trees, but something else caught my attention. Our flashlight was gone. "Cameron," I called out softly. No answer. I waited, listening. That's when I heard voices. Not loud, not close, but definitely human. 2 people, speaking quietly somewhere out in the trees. My chest tightened. "Cameron, you out there?" I called again. The voices stopped instantly. The forest went silent. For a long, terrible moment, nothing happened. And slowly, Cameron emerged from the trees and walked back into the campsite. His face was tight, his smile forced. I asked him who else was out there. He hesitated. "No one," he said. As he spoke, footsteps sounded behind him, soft, measured, approaching. I know he heard them too. I asked again, my voice shaking this time, who was in the woods. Cameron didn't answer. And as the footsteps crept closer, I realized something chilling. Whatever was happening out there, Cameron wasn't surprised. Preferred to stay anonymous. What I'm about to share happened several years ago, long before I fully understood how wrong a situation can feel without looking dangerous on the surface. At the time, I brushed off my instincts. Looking back now, I realize how close I came to something I might not have escaped. I was working at a small, standalone business back then. Nothing fancy, just a quiet office with a handful of employees. That's where I met Cameron. We were hired around the same time, and our desks were right next to each other. Naturally, we started talking first about work, then about everything else. Music, movies, weekend plans. He was easy to get along with, friendly, talkative, maybe even a little too open sometimes. We never hung out outside of work, but we joked about it constantly. Both of us loved hiking and being outdoors, and at least once a week one of us would say, "We should go camping sometime." It became a running joke, something we always talked about, but never seriously planned. Until one morning, Cameron didn't show up. When I arrived at work, his desk was empty, completely cleared out. No computer, no photos, no personal items, just gone. Later that day, I found out he'd been fired. No details, no explanation, just that he was no longer employed there. It felt abrupt, but I assumed it was something internal, maybe a mistake, maybe a policy issue. I didn't think much of it until my phone buzzed that afternoon. It was Cameron. He asked if I wanted to meet up. Said he'd been thinking about that camping trip we always talked about. The timing felt strange, but I felt bad for him. Losing a job like that couldn't have been easy. And honestly, I figured I'd probably never see him again if I said no. So I said yes. A week later, we met at a forest trailhead about 2 hours west of the city. He looked genuinely happy to see me, almost relieved. And for a moment, everything felt normal again. But as soon as we started walking, I noticed something was off. He wasn't the same Cameron I knew from the office. Not in an obvious, alarming way, just subtle. Quieter, more reserved. He didn't joke as much. When I tried to casually ask what had happened at work, he brushed it off and changed the subject. That surprised me. At the office, Cameron used to overshare about everything. Now, he seemed guarded. I assumed he was embarrassed or just didn't want to talk about it. So I let it go. We reached the campsite, set up our tents, and made lunch. For a while, things felt relaxed again. Then, without warning, Cameron stood up. "Right back," he said, and walked straight into the woods. Not casually, not like he was going for a short walk. It felt purposeful, like he had somewhere specific to be. I watched him disappear between the trees. 10 minutes later, he came back. He didn't explain where he'd gone, didn't acknowledge it at all, just sat down like nothing happened. I ignored the uneasy feeling in my stomach. I shouldn't have, because that wasn't the last time Cameron walked into the woods that day. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to stop moving. The darkness beyond the firelight didn't feel empty anymore. It felt occupied. The way the voice repeated my name without urgency, without explanation, felt deliberate, like it was testing me, like it was waiting for me to make the wrong choice. I stepped back instead of forward. The moment I did, the voice came again. Closer this time, close enough that I could tell the direction it was coming from, even if I still couldn't see anyone. That was it. Curiosity vanished, replaced by pure fear. I turned away from the trees and started packing, not fast, because I couldn't afford to make noise or miss something important, but not slow either. Every few seconds, I stopped, listening for movement, scanning the darkness around me. The fire had nearly burned out. The comforting glow that had protected me earlier was now just a weak pulse of orange embers. Shadows stretched longer with every passing minute. Then I heard footsteps, dry leaves crunching, not rushing, not wandering, intentional. Whoever was out there knew exactly what they were doing. The voice called my name again as I shoved gear into my backpack. Each time it sounded closer, like it was circling, adjusting its distance to mine. I could feel time slipping away, the night closing in around me. My hands shook as I slung the backpack over my shoulders. I pulled out my flashlight and hesitated. Turning it on would let me see, but it would also let him see me. I left it off. I stepped away from the dying fire and moved quietly in the opposite direction of the voice, letting the darkness swallow me. I kept my steps light, heart pounding so loudly I was sure it would give me away. Behind me, the voice called out once more. I didn't respond. When I finally glanced back, I could barely see the faint glow of the embers through the trees. And standing just beyond that glow, there was someone there. Only an outline, no details, no face, just a shape that didn't look quite right. Something about the way it stood too still, too unnatural, sent a jolt of terror through me. I turned and ran, not blindly, but fast enough that every branch and root felt like a threat. The woods were silent again, no voice, no footsteps, just the sound of my own breathing and the distant crack of twigs underfoot. The hike out felt endless. Every shadow looked like a figure. Every sound felt like pursuit. But eventually, I reached my car. I locked the doors, sat there shaking, and didn't move until the sun began to rise. I thought about calling the police, but how do you explain something like that? A man calling your name in the woods. No proof, no description, no crime, just terror. Nearly 3 years have passed since that night, and I still don't know what or who was out there. Part of me hates admitting this, but sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd stepped closer, if I'd followed the voice. Because as terrifying as that night was, I know, deep down, that if I had taken one more step toward the darkness, I might never have come back. I thought about leaving. That idea kept looping in my head as the day dragged on. Packing up wouldn't have been hard. I could have been back home before midnight, safe and warm, but I hated the thought of cutting my final camping trip of the year short, especially over something I couldn't explain and couldn't even prove was still a threat. By afternoon, I convinced myself it was nothing. Maybe another camper had passed through. Maybe he'd shown up late, realized the lake wasn't empty, and left without wanting to start a confrontation. That explanation didn't sit right, but it was enough to calm me down. As the sun dipped low, I built a small fire and stayed close to it. The lake reflected the orange glow, and the familiar sounds returned. The crackle of wood whined through the trees, water shifting softly against the shore. Slowly, the tension in my body loosened. Night settled in quietly, too quietly. I pulled my winter jacket tighter and leaned back in my folding chair. The warmth of the fire and the steady rhythm of the wilderness made my eyelids heavy. I didn't want to move, didn't want to crawl into the tent just yet, so I let myself drift, half awake, half asleep. That's when I heard it. My name, spoken clearly, calmly, close enough that it snapped my eyes open instantly. I froze. My heart slammed against my chest as I scanned the trees, spinning in place, expecting to see someone standing just beyond the firelight. But there was nothing. The forest looked exactly the same as it had seconds earlier still. Dark, indifferent. For a moment, I tried to laugh it off. I told myself it had to be a dream. One of those strange hallucinations that happen when you're drifting in and out of sleep. It felt real, but so do dreams sometimes. Still, my hands were shaking. After a full minute of silence, I swallowed hard and called out, "Hello." My voice echoed weakly across the lake and vanished into the trees. No response. That should have been enough reassurance. And yet, the unease didn't leave. Stayed sitting there, wide awake now, staring into the darkness, replaying the sound of my name over and over in my head. About half an hour passed. Just as my breathing slowed and my eyes began to droop again, before I even had the chance to fall asleep, I heard it a second time. My name. This time, there was no mistaking it. The voice didn't sound familiar, but the tone was wrong in a way I can't fully explain. It wasn't aggressive. It wasn't loud. It sounded inviting, like someone calling for help, like someone trying to get me to come closer. I stood up slowly. The firelight barely reached the edge of the trees. Beyond, that was pure blackness. And from somewhere inside it, the voice called my name again, closer now. My mind raced. How could a stranger in the middle of the woods know my name? I took a cautious step toward the tree line and called out again, my voice unsteady. "Hello." 15 seconds passed, and for the fourth time, the voice answered, not with words, not with explanation, just my name. That's when I knew something was very, very wrong. And standing there at the edge of the light, I realized I had a choice to make.